Welcome to Courage in the Darkness with your host, Philip Roberts. It's time to awaken America, y'all. Let's get into it.
Courage in the darkness, light in the truth. Let's awaken America together. Hey, Patriots. Phil Roberts here, and you're tuned into Courage in the Darkness, Awaken America. Tonight, we're tackling a subject that breaks my heart, and I know it will for you too. It's something that affects families, children, and the very moral fabric of our society. I'll probably offend a few of my listeners, but they need to hear the truth and let it sink in. We're talking about the transgender epidemic and how children are being led down paths that are medically, psychologically, and spiritually dangerous. This isn't about hate. This isn't about targeting anybody personally. This is about truth, protection, and God's design. The crisis is escalating daily. From schools encouraging kids to transition to medical procedures and hormones that have lifelong consequences, to a culture that experiments while silencing parents. This is a crisis. The assault on our family unit, the foundational structure of our nation, is being waged in the classrooms and in doctors' offices, and it's often backed by the power of the state. This is a profound moral and political betrayal of the most vulnerable among us. Over our time together this evening, we're going to trace how this started and what's happening in schools and society, the medical dangers of these interventions, and most importantly, what we as parents, communities, and Christians can do to protect our children while keeping conversations civil. We'll include stories from people who've lived it, statistics from credible sources, and biblical principles that remind us that God's design is perfect. His plan is flawless. So grab a seat, open your mind, and let's walk through the facts together. Because courage isn't just for the battlefield. It's for your home, your family, and standing up for the truth in a culture that's increasingly hostile to it. We must be the voice for those children who cannot speak for themselves, and the shield for parents who feel isolated and threatened by a hostile, progressive bureaucracy. To understand the crisis we face today, we have to look back over a century. The ideological foundation of this movement lies in a seemingly small shift in medical terminology that gradually separated biological reality from identity. Did you know that before 1917, children born with ambiguous genitalia were labeled as hermaphrodites? It was a medical term descriptive of biology, not ideology. Then in 1917, the term was changed to intersex, in part to sound less stigmatizing, but also to begin separating biology from strict social definitions. That change itself wasn't inherently political, but it laid the groundwork for decades of medical and cultural debates about what defines a human being. For most of history, if a child had ambiguous sex characteristics, the approach was cautious. Doctors and parents monitored the child, gave counseling, and allowed the child to grow before making permanent interventions. Decisions were made with careful consideration of natural biology and long-term outcomes. This was a model of conservative, cautious medical practice, respecting the natural development of a child. But somewhere along the way, the conversation shifted from caution to ideology. The shift coincided with a broader progressive push to dismantle traditional institutions, including the family, and to redefine all aspects of human identity as fluid social constructs rather than fixed realities. Fast forward to the 21st century, and instead of teaching children about biology and natural development, some schools and advocacy groups now tell children you can choose your gender and your body will follow. This is a lie being sold to our children. It's a repudiation of biology, reality, and God's creation. Hormones, puberty blockers, surgeries, all of this is presented as normal, even encouraged for minors. And often, these interventions happen with little regard for the long-term mental and physical health consequences. Here's where the crisis becomes personal. Reports show that transgender identifying youth face incredibly high rates of mental illness, anxiety, and depression, far higher than the general population. Studies indicate that even after transitioning, the risk of suicide attempts remain alarmingly high. These are real children with real struggles, and society is telling them the answer is drugs, surgery, and identity change before giving them counseling or support for underlying trauma. This is medical malpractice masked as compassion. It's a fundamental betrayal of the Hippocratic Oath. We're seeing this not just in isolated cases. Certain blue states are now legally overriding parental rights when it comes to gender transitions. Parents who object to medical intervention for their children sometimes face threats from child protective services or even potential legal consequences. This is an unprecedented assault on the constitutional right of parents to direct upbringing and medical care of their own children. Meanwhile, the schools and CPS officials who approve these interventions are praised for progressive thinking, regardless of the outcomes for the children themselves. And here's the moral and spiritual side. God created humans with a design, male or female. Scripture repeatedly affirms the sanctity of that design. This isn't about being cruel. This is about protecting children and honoring God's natural order. No amount of hormones, surgeries, or ideology can rewrite chromosomes, XY or XX. Biology doesn't bend to politics or popular culture. The medical reality confirms the spiritual truth. Children on puberty blockers often experience stunted bone growth, hormonal imbalances, and infertility. Long-term studies are limited, but medical experts warn these interventions can have lifelong consequences, yet the push continues. And because social and cultural pressure is so strong, even medical professionals who question the interventions are often silenced. This is the environment we're living in today, a world that celebrates identity over biology, ideology over science, and ideology over God's design. The effects aren't just physical, they're psychological and social. Children who are encouraged to transition often face alienation from family, confusion about their identity, and trauma that lasts into adulthood. Some look back years later and wish they hadn't transitioned, having experienced regret, depression, and social isolation. This phenomenon of detransition is the tragic, living testimony to the lie of the transgender movement. Understanding this history is critical. The conversation didn't start yesterday. It began with small shifts in terminology, expanded through medical practices, and exploded culturally with schools and advocacy groups promoting gender transition as normal and necessary, even for children. And that leads us to the next section, where we'll explore how ideology, social pressure, and government policies have created an environment where children are being guided or pushed into irreversible medical interventions, often without sufficient oversight or parental consent. Now that we've traced the historical roots, let's fast forward to the present, where ideology meets the classroom. This is where the story turns from academic to personal, because our children are the ones who are on the front lines. The public school system, once a pillar of community values, has weaponized into an ideological battleground against conservative principles and parental authority. In many schools across the country, particularly in liberal urban areas, children as young as elementary school are told they can choose their gender, and the school will support that choice. Not through counseling or therapy, but by encouraging a social transition, New names, new pronouns, and sometimes even access to puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones. The curriculum itself is often saturated with concepts of gender fluidity and critical gender theory, teaching children that family is restrictive and that their own feelings supersede biological reality. Think about that for a moment. These are minors, children who are still developing mentally, emotionally, and physically. They lack the capacity for informed consent on something as simple as getting a tattoo. Yet, they're being encouraged to make irreversible decisions about their body's fundamental architecture. Yet, in some districts, if a parent disagrees with the school's approach, they can be reported to Child Protective Services for interfering with the child's welfare. This is tyranny masquerading as therapy. It's the state asserting ownership over the child, effectively treating parents as obstacles to be circumvented. Meanwhile, school counselors and social workers are praised for being progressive, forward-thinking, and inclusive. It's not just happening in a few places. States like California, New York, and Massachusetts have policies explicitly protecting minors who identify as transgender, sometimes even overriding parental objections. This creates a moral and legal quagmire. On one side, the state and the school claim to be protecting the child's identity, while the other side, the parents, argue the child is being coerced into irreversible medical decisions in direct violation with their fundamental rights. The progressive left argues this is about safety, but true safety is protecting a child from permanent physical harm and upholding the sanctity of the family. The medical aspect is serious. Puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries are not just cosmetic. These treatments carry lifelong consequences: stunted growth, sterility, cardiovascular risks, and profound psychological impact. Yet, advocates claim that blocking puberty is reversible, ignoring decades of research showing that long-term effects can be irreversible. This selective adherence to science is a hallmark of radical ideology. It uses scientific language to justify its political goals while discarding any inconvenient data. Mental health is another concern. Studies of transgender identifying youth show higher rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation than their peers. When a child is encouraged to transition instead of receiving therapy for trauma or identity confusion, it amplifies the psychological toll. In other words, we aren't fixing a problem. We're creating new problems that often last into adulthood. We are treating a psychological crisis with a permanent physical solution, a betrayal of sound medical ethics. Now, I want to share a story that one of my listeners emailed me. That's why I'm talking about this week. It's an important example of how this ideology can disrupt families. The parent adopted a child who had already been through trauma. The child, having experienced early life instability, was highly vulnerable to external suggestion. Instead of focusing on counseling and healing, the school recommended that the child transition to the opposite gender. The parent, unfortunately influenced by prevailing ideology, agreed. The result? The child rejected the parent, changed schools, and cut off communication. Notice the pattern? It's not biology or faith guiding decisions. It's ideology. And the child suffers the consequences. The cultural narrative successfully alienated the child from the family, substituting the authority of the state and the progressive school for the authority of the parent. Puberty blockers, hormones, and social pressure are being normalized. while parents who try to intervene in other families are vilified. This double standard is one of the most dangerous aspects of this epidemic. The left often says, let's follow the science. Yet, when science aligns with biological reality, XY is male, XX is female, it's dismissed as outdated or oppressive. Meanwhile, ideology dictates the policies and practices in schools, media, and sometimes even law. We must also consider the cultural reinforcement social media, children's literature, and entertainment are saturated with messages promoting gender fluidity and affirmation at all costs. Kids are absorbing these messages daily, and often without parental guidance. This relentless stream of content reinforces the perception that transitioning is normal and expected, even if the child is struggling with unrelated mental health issues. As Christians and as concerned citizens, this is a moral crossroads. We are witnessing a war on childhood itself, where innocence is sacrificed on the altar of radical social theory. We are commanded to protect children not just ideologically, but physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The broader cultural battle is about reclaiming the language of truth and reason. When words like science, consent, and evidence are twisted to justify ideology, we lose the ability to make rational decisions as a society. By maintaining clarity, citing reliable research, and highlighting real-world consequences, we push back against the cultural tide while maintaining moral authority. Standing firm doesn't mean shouting. It means speaking clearly, consistently, and compassionately, giving society a chance to listen and reflect. So now that we understand how this ideology infiltrates schools and shapes children's lives, the next question becomes, what can we do as parents, citizens, and community members to push back without resorting to anger, violence, or dehumanization like the left would? That's what we'll explore in this section. Practical steps, respectful dialogue, and how to restore balance in a culture gone too far. First, knowledge is power. Parents need to understand what schools are teaching and what policies exist in their state. That means reading district policies, attending school board meetings, and asking tough questions. What counseling options are provided? Are puberty blockers or hormones being discussed? And under what circumstances? How are parental rights being upheld? We must act as vigilant stewards of our children's lives and demand transparency from the institutions we fund. Second, advocacy must be civil and fact-based. We cannot win hearts by shouting, threatening, or demonizing teachers and administrators. Calm, well-informed advocacy works better than anger because it shows you are reasonable, moral, and focused on your child's well-being, not ideology or politics. Third, community support matters. Connect with other parents, faith-based organizations, and local experts who share your concerns. Together, you can provide a unified voice advocating for counseling, medical guidance, and protecting children from irreversible decisions at an age when they're not yet capable of fully understanding the consequences. Fourth, we need to promote therapy and healing for children, not social or medical transition as the first solution. Trauma, anxiety, and identity confusion are serious challenges that deserve licensed counseling, safe spaces, and family support, rather than immediate medical interventions. The focus should be on long-term health, both mental and physical. Fifth, respecting the child's humanity while upholding truth is key. This is not about attacking individuals who identify as transgender, but about defending children from decisions they may regret for life. Listen to testimonials from people who transitioned and later wished they hadn't. These stories are powerful, evidence that ideology, peer pressure, and early medical interventions can cause lasting harm. Sixth, know your legal rights and protections. In some states, parental rights have been challenged when parents oppose school sanctioned transitions. Stay informed about legislation, school policy, and legal avenues to protect children. You have the moral and legal responsibility to intervene when a child's welfare is at risk. Seventh, promote public awareness. Share articles, studies, and personal stories responsibly. Encourage conversations that are truthful, compassionate, and non-confrontational. Education is one of the strongest tools we have. Finally, and most importantly, root your efforts in faith and values. God's design is perfect, male and female, XY and XX. Stand firm in that truth, but also show love, patience, and understanding. Children are listening, families are watching, and communities are forming opinions based on how we respond. As we close this episode, remember that the ripple effects of this movement go far beyond the individual child. They touch families, schools, and communities, reshaping the way we communicate, teach, and even relate to one another. When society begins to normalize permanent medical intervention for minors based on ideology rather than evidence, it sends a message that truth is negotiable and biology is flexible, which creates tension in homes, classrooms, and neighborhoods. Tonight, we've uncovered hard truths, but knowing them isn't enough. It's on us to act. This isn't about violence or hate. It's about conviction, courage, and community. If we stay silent, the loudest voices, no matter how destructive, will define the future for our kids. Speak up at your school boards. Support parents and teachers who are trying to do right. Share facts, not insults. Refuse to bow to intimidation. When we talk about these issues, we're not dealing with headlines or hashtags. We're dealing with real people, real families, real pain. We're also dealing with hope. Hope that compassion, dialogue, and prayer can lead to healing. I know this conversation isn't easy, but ignoring what's happening doesn't protect anyone. Let's choose to be people of light. Let's defend children without shaming those who disagree. Let's show that faith and facts can guide us, and that courage doesn't have to come wrapped in anger. If you're listening and you felt silenced or alone for holding these beliefs, hear this. You are not alone, and your voice matters. If tonight's episode spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend or a family member or someone who needs to hear that they're not crazy for questioning the culture. Subscribe to Courage in the Darkness, Awaken America on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen. Leave a review, engage respectfully in comments, and send me your stories or thoughts for future episodes. And if you want to support the work that I'm doing, check out pharaohstudios.shop or check out my Patreon, Courage in the Darkness. It's another way we're spreading light through creativity and truth. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We do daily devotionals at 6 in the morning Central Time and 6 p.m. Central Time. Remember this, friends. God doesn't make mistakes. His design is perfect. His truth is unchanging. Stand firm, stay compassionate, and never stop seeking the light. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. This is Philip Roberts signing off. Until next time.